defining time at ICC as Ruto, Sang and Bensouda make their submissions. The Deputy President William Ruto is currently at The Hague, Netherlands, and is there to attend the hearings for the no case to answer motion. And of course, something else that many Kenyans are looking up to is the judgment concerning the amendment of Rule 68 that will be given. Welcome to WTV News Review. Always a pleasure being your host. My name is Elijah Mwangi. This afternoon, I'm joined by one of our news anchors. This is Linda Kruger, who is going to give us her perspective concerning some of the stories that are making the headlines. Remember, you can always engage us directly on Twitter. Is WTVKE. Use the hashtag NewsReview, or else you can also communicate to us directly at Lynn Kruger or at It's Elijah Mwangi. Thank you very much, Linda, for finding time for us.
Thank you, Elijah, for having me.
Looking at the dailies, what is capturing your attention?
Top of the headlines, we have Ruto's visit to The Hague once again for his no case to answer motion. And I can say that the country is very expectant about what's going to be going on there at The Hague and whether, in essence, he will get the motion on his side.
Sure, the no case to answer motion, of course, many people will be looking up to that, as we've said. Something else is concerning the amendment of Rule 68, which, permits the use of recanted testimony and all that. But let's just go to the court program so that the viewers can really get to know what's happening. I'm meant to understand that, according to the court schedule, Joshua Sang will today present his oral arguments on why the case should be terminated at this stage, while Ruto takes the whole day tomorrow. That's Wednesday. But I would really like us to look, this story from a different perspective. Now, this is 2016, we have 2017. Maybe we have these cases that are ongoing, depending on, this is a defining time, because the outcome or whatever that will come out from these, 2 to 3 days will really determine whether the case will proceed or not. If it proceeds, which kind of implications do you think this case will have come 2017?
It's going to be a very tough time for our deputy president. I mean, majority of his time and resources will have to sort of weigh in towards, handling the case at The Hague. And that might bring in a lot of question marks. And I know that the opposition will be very, very the first people kind of to note this and bring it out that he will have to divide his time between the Netherlands and his time in the country. And really, the question would be, is that what we want? And how effective will he be doing his job, having half his time in the Netherlands and half in Kenya? So that's one very big major change we expect if the case does not go in his favor.
Now, looking at some of, what we expect, we see the deputy president has filed a 95 pages document. This is the request for judgment of acquittal. Well, which offers a glimpse of the outline of arguments that he will be deploying. On the other side, the ICC prosecutor Fatou Bensouda has responded through a 140-page rebuttal. Now, this is your area. I mean, that's your background. In terms of looking at the 140-page rebuttal versus the 95-page request, what do you think concerning, this kind of, counter-attacking, so to speak?
Having not been able to read both the request and the rebuttal, I would think the number of pages really doesn't matter. What will matter, and what I'm sure the court will be looking at, is the validity of the points raised by both sides. And also the fact that given that our president was already acquitted, I think the prosecutor having the onus on her side to prove that indeed there were post-election violence perpetrators, and this being allegedly our deputy president and Sang, who are now still having their cases before The Hague. She's very keen to make sure that our deputy president doesn't get this acquittal. So I am pretty sure she has raised some very different and unique points in her rebuttal, as opposed to the previous alleged perpetrators cases that were before the court.
Now, let's go to the other person. We've been talking so much about the DP, that is William Ruto. We have the former journalist Joshua Arap Sang. Now, his case is a bit different from, Ruto's case, because as Ruto is being accused of organizing that network and mobilizing people for 2007-2008 eviction in Rift Valley. Now, the former journalist, of course, there is the issue of freedom of expression. That's what is coming up. And in fact, at one point he had argued that the media broadcasts are protected in the international law under the right to free expression. Do you think that Joshua Rapsang's case is, that he will be in a position to get off the hook, considering maybe one would argue whatever that he said, it's on tape?
That's a very, I think his predicament is very tricky, given the fact that, let's look at other incidents within the African region where we've had journalists sort of incite and propagate hate speech, especially through media. It's a very thin line between freedom of expression and retaining that right to actually giving people the morale and leading them in a particular direction. One good example is the Rwandan genocide.
Exactly.
And we've had, journalists before this court, the tribunal that's part of this court, and also their local judicial system, and they have been sent to jail for it. So he's in a bit of a tight spot, and I don't think that freedom of expression is going to be the right that will save him.
In fact, just talking of the freedom of expression, there has been some issues raised by the office of the prosecutor saying that such protection, whatever that he's claiming, is not accorded to all forms of expression which spread, incite, promote, or justify hatred based on intolerance. So I think that's going to be tricky for him. Let's look at some other stories that are making the headlines as well. And let's go to our field, these things about broadcasting and all that. Now, last week, that's when Francis Wangusi, the DG for Communication Authority of Kenya, decided to throw spanner into the works and say these preachers are becoming too much, and sometimes they are more like, crossing the line. And we had the issue of seed pastors. Now, that issue has generated mixed reactions from the clergy as well as even the Muslim leaders. Now, let me first take your own assessment of the entire, law that the CAK, that is Communication Authority of Kenya, is saying that this is something that you must comply with.
I think the church, and I use that term very loosely here, is very afraid of being regulated. I think we had this same discussion when we had the whole Kanyari saga. You remember the 310, yes. The seed pastors. And I think that's what the church is afraid of, being regulated and having the government coming in on matters of faith. But the question really is there a necessity for regulation? And I think to an extent that there should be. But the question is, to what extent do we need a law, governing how churches should function and how they should work, and really who will benefit more? We have our mainstream churches and we have your other churches. Who will be the benefit? Mainstream churches already have their own regulatory systems in place. Are they going to do away with this and adapt whatever will be there? It's really a bit, I think there needs to be more dialogue about this as opposed to just, coming out and setting out various rules.
Let me just pick one or two issues that have been raised by the main churches, and then from there we look at, the other things that were raised concerning the media fraternity and all that. Now we have the SUPKEM Secretary General, that is Aiden Wachu, saying the regulations risk violating freedom of worship and amounts to clamp down on religious institutions. Now, talking of freedom of worship, and I think some pastors have a case. I'm not speaking for them, but they are saying, I think we should not generalize and say we should not have these preachers on air. I think if one goes astray, then you should not use that particular preacher to generalize and give a blanket judgment that all preachers are seed pastors. So on that particular point, don't you think that, the likes of Bishop Mark Kariuki, have a case?
I do believe they have a case, but the question is, do we have the sort of manpower to keep tracking the singular pastors in comparison to having one general rule to have everybody in line? So why not have that dialogue, understand where everybody is coming from, and have a win-win situation? Because I think that also this other good pastors don't benefit from these seed pastors, because I mean, when you lose faith with your congregation, they're not going to move to you. They're going to look for another sort of line of belief or religion.
And something else is concerning the issue that was raised, when it comes to registration of churches and all that. There was one proposal that some of these pastors, or maybe all of them, should have background in theology. But then that now brings another twist to the story, because we know some of these preachers are not learned, so to speak. So I don't know what you take from this.
I agree. They should get their grace period, and I totally agree with the requirement that they should have a background in theology. And I remember some time back interviewing a bishop who had the notion that, if you're in church and the Spirit comes upon you and you stand up and decide to become a priest or a pastor, you can become one. I don't think it's right.
Now let's go to some of other matters that were raised by the Communication Authority of Kenya. Now, religious institutions were not the only affected sectors. When broadcasters now are being told they have until June to comply with some laws, I really want us to be very specific with one particular regulation that was given, and this is concerning the advertisements, because some of our media stations rely on, it's purely
actually
advertisements.
Everybody relies on advertisements.
Apart from now partnerships and all that.
Yeah.
So when you look at the Communication Authority of Kenya saying that you should not have this kind of advertisements, do you think it's being fair to the media owners?
It depends on the conditions that they give. When we come to specific advertisements like the ones that you've just mentioned, I mean, alcoholic beverages, sexual kind of based advertisements, I think there's cause to worry. I mean, you don't necessarily want, for example, in the scheduling of programs to have cartoon time and your children are watching TV, then the next thing you see, condoms or alcohol. So some sense of regulation is welcome, but really to what extent? Because there's the feeling from the media fraternity that CAK has really been on our case from the digital migration sagas moving on into now. So to what extent? To what extent?
I think that's the million-dollar question. But now let's just, before we take a break, look at something else that was also mentioned concerning content. The regulations include a mandatory inclusion of 40%. This is about 9 hours of local content, failure to which the broadcaster risks a fine of between $500,000 and 0.2% of their gross annual turnover, whichever is higher. Now, is it possible to start with?
I think we have the ball is in our court, but I think the intention, the motive behind it is good, but as to its realization, maybe we should also ask for a grace period, given that we have now an increased number of stations. We're looking for more content, so maybe they should consider giving everybody a grace period on that one.
But now the Communication Authority of Kenya says that the broadcasters have until June to comply with the law. But I think it's also a challenge to the independent content producers to produce more local content, and maybe there will be a lot of market for that. But as per now, we can only hope that, because $500,000 fine or 0.2%, that's hefty. So I mean, we just have to comply at one point or the other. Now we take a short break at this point, but keep it WTV, because when we come back we'll be looking at matters business, and I don't know whether you know now that you don't require a partner to register a company. And of course we have a lot from the world of sports, considering that last night we had the Ballon d'Or. You want to know who is the topmost when it comes to matters football.